We join John Gatto in his lecture entitled The Guerrilla Curriculum, already in progress.
And therefore, in no single decision of your life, if an expert's available, should you not avail yourself of that person's services. Well, if that's true for us, who have been trivialized and made childlike, certainly since the end of the Second World War, then it's true in spades for your kids and my kids and all the kids out there. So I'm here to contradict that with a little bit of documentary evidence. I want to confess that is not well prepared and strategically arranged. Over the course of being a junior high school teacher in Manhattan, living in an apartment, there's no space to store anything. And I'll tell you that the conflicts come thick and fast. They never stop. There's never a boat ride. So whatever documentation I have here sort of accidentally survived my transit through the world. However, why don't you look at some of it? Some of this is my kids, and some of it's stuff I use to goose my kids into action. I'm going to need a media expert to turn that machine on. Hey. 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 Let's start with a 17-year-old girl who was thrown out of 6 New York City schools for being wretched. Impossible. A 17-year-old girl whose father approached her. He was a minor artist in New York City. He had a few bucks. He was not rich by any means. But he said, it would cost me $60,000 to send you to college, and I have a check for $60,000 in my hand, and I'm going to give it to you. I want you to move out of the house immediately, and I don't care what you spend this money for. Buy drugs, I don't care, he said. On the other hand, he said, I'm prepared to buy you a 26-foot boat. It's much more than 26 feet from me to that camera. A 26-foot boat if you will sail it around the world alone. Now, mind you, this girl was working as a bicycle messenger in Manhattan. She's like one of these kamikaze bikes that go in and out of the truck, deliver packages. She'd been thrown out of 6 schools. She had no background as a nautical woman. And obviously, when she did take the necessary navigation courses to be allowed to sail out of New York Harbor, she cheated. Over there. We're there. Maiden voyage. The first American woman to circumnavigate the globe alone. That's not ancient history. That's about 7 or 8 years ago. A bicycle messenger who cheated on a navigation test. How did she learn to navigate? There's some heavy-duty mathematics. Well, she tells it, and I have no reason not to believe this is true. The generator went out about 30 or 40 nautical miles from Bermuda, and hurricane was coming up. I mean 20, 30, 40-foot waves. And she knew that if she missed Bermuda, there's nothing beyond it at all, and she would certainly be dead. There was no one on the boat. She couldn't call anybody by telephone. She said, I sat there with an electric torch and the navigation books, and I figured out how to get that thing into Bermuda Harbor. She had a cat on the boat, and 2 years later, she had sailed around the world alone. Met a Danish kid doing the same thing. They got married. They live in Brooklyn Heights, New York. Say hello for me if you drop over. Now, at the same time, same general time, the beginning of the 1980s. Oh, got that right. The beginning of the 1980s, a 3rd grade dropout named George Megan, it's a ratty-looking guy in the lower left-hand corner, He was the lowest ranked sailor on a tramp steamer crossing to South America. But he had this dream that he would walk from Tierra del Fuego to Point Barrow, Alaska. He would walk from the South Pole to the North Pole as close as you can walk. He had no magnesium frame backpack. He had no freeze-dried food. He had no Adidas sneakers. He didn't have anything. I think he had a map there, and he jumped ship in Chile, got his way to Tierra del Fuego, and 7 years later, I think in 1980 or 79, he arrived at the North Pole with his family. He had met and married a Japanese girl along the way, and they had 2 kids. He had walked 20,000 miles. Now, I know a skeptic in this audience is saying, but it's not 20,000 miles. It's only 13,000. It's true. But when they crossed into Texas, he said, I've always wanted to see Washington, D.C. So they detoured 7,000 miles and saw the Capitol. I'm sure many of you have done. Now, if you open the newspaper, this is the last class newspaper. I didn't use photocopy. This was originally printed on newsprint. And it came out, I would guess, 4 or 5 times a year, irregularly. But this is the last issue that I did before the school district got on my case. And I said to myself, even though I live in an apartment, I think I ought to preserve this, because one day when I'm telling people what kids are capable of doing, people are going to say, yeah, it's easy to talk. But it's not so easy. If you look on page 2, to ignore the fact that this 13-year-old girl you see booked an appointment for herself at the evening speak out at the New York Board of Education. And she spoke for 12 minutes, actively berating the commissioners of New York schools that she had just made $3,000 or $4,000 in 5 weeks, cutting class and running a business, and that nothing in any curriculum in any school, including Stuyvesant, had anything to do with a job being anything other than what someone gives you for good behavior. She said the principles of American life lead people to independent livelihoods. And here you're holding me for 12 years, and I broke out, and I'm here to tell you that you're doing a wrong and a bad thing. So that's B.J. Cummings, teen businesswoman, slams Board of Ed on unrealistic curriculum. The year there is, I think it's 1980 or 81. Now I'd like you to look at B.J. Cummings as of 1991, 11 years later. She had dropped out of college. By the way, B.J. was, as you can see in the photograph, a white young woman, very fair complected, who grew up in Harlem. Why she did that was not because her family was ultra-liberal, but the father was gone, and the mother couldn't afford to live anyplace else. So that's where they grew up. I asked her several times whether that had had a horrifying effect on her development, and she said that she hardly even noticed it. Anyway, here's B.J. 11 years later. B.J. drops out of college in her freshman year, teaches herself Portuguese, hitchhikes to Brazil. How do you do that? I guess you go to Miami, you go to airports around there, and you talk some private pilot who's going down there anyway into taking you, and apparently thousands of people do this. I mean, it's another one of the great secrets. She gets to the Amazon. She goes up the Amazon to an Indian village where the culture is being destroyed by the recent construction of a dam. And she writes a book in 7 weeks called Damn the Rivers, Damn the People, about the political use of dams and other monumental construction, to pay off the right people, irrespective of the harm they do. The World Wildlife Foundation picked it up. I believe it's translated into 7 languages. Out of the book, she gets a free PhD from, I think, UCLA Berkeley, but one of the colleges down there. And she just got married about a year ago. And when she came to Carnegie Hall to speak, the year that I quit teaching, Pat Ferenga was one of the speakers. She came to Carnegie Hall and she said, I can't stay for the party afterwards because I'm lecturing in Bermuda about her specialty, which very few people have, to the effect of dam building on traditional cultures. Hey, that was BJ. I'd like to show you some more of this because what we're working on is to what extent you can trust people that we call children, and I believe wrongly so. We've invented the culture of childhood, and we impose it. I think the shortfall is very, very large. I'm trying to respect the fact someone's tape recording this for whatever reason, I don't know. Surely not to sell these tapes. Okay. If you come to the talk tomorrow morning I'm giving, you'll hear me say glancingly that I made the structure of schooling the central academic study that we did. I was desperate to declassify children, or to have them declassify themselves, and I knew that could not take place as long as they would leave my room or the activities that I allowed and go back into the culture that told them who they were and what they could do and what numbers they had to display when they wanted to do them. So one of the ways, this is an illustration of one of the ways that without preaching, I was able to attack the assumptions of schooling. Now, there isn't a person here or a person alive who hasn't at one time or another said, why do I have to ask permission to go to the toilet there? And furthermore, I would tell the kids that, that when I'm in the middle of one of these ranting expositions, I don't want to be interrupted with some request to go to the toilet because I'll turn on you like a wild dog and humiliate you, and I'll discuss your privates and everything else. On the other hand, I had a standing offer. I said, you can go to the toilet when you want to. All you have to do is take, what you can't see here is that there's a hood, too, that goes on. You put the toilet pass on, and I said, if you want to make your own toilet pass out of an old sheet, you can just come to look like the Ku Klux Klan meeting, but you can go to the toilet wherever you want to go. There it is. Toilet activity was extremely limited in my class, but not because I prevented it. Wait, I'm desperate to put this back in the envelope it belongs to, or otherwise. All right. In a city like Boston, and I really almost hate to say this, because the truth is, in the simplest country town, there are innumerable valuable things for kids to participate in as citizens. I mean, not as kids. But my imagination's been tempered in cities, and Boston certainly qualifies as one of those. There are constantly public meetings in cities. Usually they're pro forma, that is, the decision's already been made, but citizens are invited to make a presentation of their point of view. That's an infinite number of opportunities for your kids, in fact, not as good little kids, but as people, to bring some information to the attention of important people. And furthermore, to develop this cast iron personality where you're not afraid to speak in any setting, and you know how to organize information. So let me tell you this hesitation is not caused by Alzheimer's, it's caused by thinking about whoever's recording this. I wish I didn't have to do this. Okay, let me get the toilet pass away here first. Okay. When I arrived in New York City from Pittsburgh, I saw immediately the differences between a city that was organized in large part by its people for its people to a city that was organized by elite groups who may have meant well by people but really didn't understand their needs. So that swimming, which is pathetically easy to do in Pittsburgh, far out of reach of, any body of water that you'd want to be in, opportunities to do that were abundant, whereas in New York City, with the ocean lapping, nobody swims in New York City, and the public swimming pools had been reduced to 5. Fortunately, one of those 5 public swimming pools was very close to one of the schools I worked in, and I was constantly looking for some official way to get masses of kids out of the building. That's the hard thing. Once they're out of the building, whether they went swimming or not, I didn't care, but a lot of them did go swimming, in fact. So I said, well, I don't want to waste this time just having fun there. So I went up to Columbia and I got kids on the swimming team to come down and give lessons to those who wanted them. But in any case, an announcement was made about 10 years ago that all the public swimming pools were going to be closed because of a budgetary constraint, and anyway, nobody used them. That meant, by the way, and you would not be able to guess what political party I belong to for what I'm going to say here, but that nobody used them meant that no upper middle class white kids used them, because plenty of people use these swimming pools, but they didn't record on the instrumentation of the New York Times, which approved of the closures. So I made a standing offer to any kid in the school that if they were willing to go through a crash course in public presentation, that I was willing to let them sign up and go down to City Hall and stand in these august chambers and make their case, one right after another, which precipitated a crisis at the hearing, by the way, because it turned out about 15 kids had signed up using their right to claim 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and the chairman, who was only marking time, I'm telling you, all these hearings, the decision's been made ahead of time. It's to let you ventilate. It was too impatient to let them speak, at which point we got tough with the city commissioners. Anyway, one after another.
I know, I've been told that over and over. Clement Ginsburg, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Is it true that you want to close our neighborhood swimming pool because you think not enough people use the pool? The reason more people do not use the swimming pool is because 9 out of 10 West Siders have no idea there is a swimming pool on West 59th Street. Marissa DeMar, I'm representing young citizens
the West 86th Street neighborhood. Oh, no, that was somebody else. Good afternoon. My name is Israel Paniaga. I'm here today representing the teenage swimmers. You want us to swim in the Hudson River or in Central Park Lake? That would get pretty cold in the fall, winter, and spring. Instead of closing the pool someday, we need more day, and on and on. I have pages of these people appearing. I don't know what effect this had, just as I'm afraid I do know what effect the girls had on the Beatles Memorial in Central Park, but the swimming pools were not closed. They were not closed. And nobody else of any effectiveness was at the hearings to speak for the swimming pools, because we all knew it was a foregone conclusion. You'll hear me refer tomorrow, if you come to the talk in the morning, to a girl who constantly tossed her long blonde hair. I mean, hundreds of times an hour. I'm sure you've seen women like that. Somehow or other, they just cannot keep the hair out of their eyes. And I had noticed that she had, at all times, 100% of the male attention in the class, including mine. I also knew that there wasn't a girl in the classroom who wouldn't cheerfully cut her throat. So I decided to defuse this hostility toward Caitlin. And I asked Caitlin, I said, listen, we have to make the subject, if it's agreeable to you, the subject of your tossing your hair, an intellectual exercise in the classroom. That we have to examine it sociologically, whether or not there isn't some device that might keep the hair out of your eyes and you healthy. Let me show you Caitlin. Okay. Was Caitlin a model when the incident I'm talking to you about happened? No. Caitlin extracted a price for allowing herself to be used as the subject of the academics in the classroom. She said, I want 3 weeks out of school, and I don't want it to show on any school record. She said, and I'm going to figure out how you get a job as a cover model. I said, Caitlin, a cover model, I mean, it's $2,000 an hour range. I said, if you do it as a catalog model or something humble and make the information available to other kids, you got a deal. Well, somebody was wrong, because there you see not only that cover, but this cover. There's many. Caitlin's a lawyer today. Whether she paid her own way through law school, I do not know, but I do know this, that her mother, who approved of the project, strictly on the grounds that she was 100% certain that Caitlin had no opportunity whatsoever to get this, had booked her into a youth camp in Poland during the communist years that summer, and there certainly was some bad blood between us. It was unintentional there. The hottest nightclub in New York City for the last few years has been the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. The Nuyorican Poets Cafe was literally built and put together by a former student of mine and now a very, very close friend, Roland Lajardi Lara. He's been written about all over the world. The cafe is a phenomenal place where every Friday there's an original play written by some member of one of New York's minority communities. Every Saturday there's a poetic competition where the audience votes victory or destruction. And every Tuesday an original film script is acted out by the best actors in New York City. I mean, people that you've seen all over the place. All that was put together by a boy and several other people without parents, without any inheritance at all, who lived for a number of years after he got out of school, kind of like pickup. I mean, he'd sleep in somebody's loft and somebody else's loft and somebody else's loft. At the age of 34, he was earning $3.50 an hour as a CETA poet. That was a government program that brought poets into schools. And I can tell you, I witnessed several of the encounters between New York City school children and poets, and they're not, you can't describe them in mixed company. Wait. See, there's a secret to this. That's it. Okay, there you see Roll in the upper right-hand corner, and you see his first film. He comes to me at 34, and he says, I want to make a film. I say, well, you've never shown any interest in film at all. You don't even have a still camera. He says, I know, but I've just discovered that the national sport of Nicaragua is poetry. And I want to make a film called Nicaragua, Land of Poets. I said, you can't even pay the rent. You can make a film that should cost, I don't know, $400,000 about poets. I said, can you imagine anybody buying a ticket to that film? If you made it, what would you do with it? But I gave him $50 because on a school teacher's income, that was the maximum extent. And I drove him to the airport. He got a ticket to Nicaragua. Drove him to the airport, dropped him off at like 6:30 in the morning, and about 4 months later he was back with a whole bunch of stills of washerwomen and soldiers all declaiming poetry to each other. And I said, if this is really true, it's as revolutionary a thing as I've ever heard. I mean, Nicaragua isn't even a country that people can spell, let alone no one wants to go there. It has sharks in the freshwater lake. And these people are all poets. They have no wealth. They have no tradition of fine culture. And they're all poets. And he says, yes. He raised $400,000. He won 9 film awards with it. And his next project was the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And right now, he and I have raised together $400,000. We're $800,000 short of making a series of films about schooling in the United States, a 3-part series. So that's what I'll do when I leave here. I'll go and worry. But how was Roland in class at 13? Well, he hardly ever was in class at 13. He was everywhere that poets were. He told me that at 13 that he would never wear a necktie in his life, and he never has. Never wear a necktie in his life, and that he was going to make his living as a poet. Geez, and what do you say to a kid like that? Lots of luck? I mean, high-paid poets get $5 a poem, you know. There's absolutely no market for it there. Well, I'm wrong. Here are some things that I'm really surprised don't show up more, but I'm sure they will in homeschooling communities. One of the best ways to bond kids together, and I guess in Boston here, Pat did something, or a lot of you did something with P.G. Wodehouse, a play, and Pat played the piano, but I constantly, I mean, it wasn't a year, it wasn't a year that I didn't put together, and I didn't do it, you know, some kid producer would put together, on the strength of being free of schooling for as long as they needed to be, put together a traveling talent show. Where do you get audiences for a traveling talent show? You can't beat them off with a stick. There are all the old age homes. There are hospital wards. There are first, second, and third graders who love to watch slightly older kids sing, dance, juggle, declaim, and then sit around with those kids and learn how to do that themselves. So this was a standard of the last 10 years of my teaching. I mean, my talent teams were moving around New York City, booking themselves in, and every once in a while I would stick an oar in to make sure. Now, I would always insist on, if I tell you that I don't believe I don't believe childhood exists past, I don't know, the age of 7, 8, 9, somewhere. Probably you play it by ear with your own kid. So if people are out there demanding the time or attention of the community, then they owe the community something. I mean, it's a reciprocity. It's not one way. Look at another thing that was a constant in my classrooms that certainly would be the easiest thing in the world to do if you're willing to get up at 2 a.m. in the morning. And we would end up an hour later at the Bronx Terminal Market, which easily is the most dangerous single place in the United States. I mean, you're in the middle of not only an utter wasteland with lots of strange people wandering around, because there's stuff coming in and out from all over the country every day, and you grab some of it. It's dark, but I'll tell you this: when I approached the idea to some kids, I said, "I think you can make real money doing this." They said, "No one will sell wholesale to kids." I said, "Why don't you just try somebody with money in your hand and see whether they care what age you are?" I mean, a little baby could crawl up and hold on, he'd get the radishes too. So I started it off in the simplest fashion by demonstrating that it could invigorate the life of the school. Now, the school was highly resistant, but I said, okay, we'll just use checkout time 1 day a week and just run it for like 25 minutes there. Well, the first time we ran it, there were 3 boys involved. Each made net $30 after paying me for my driving time. It made $30 a piece. I had put up the original stake to buy the stuff. But a lot of teachers were furious with me because they had left a little bit late, and there weren't any of these fresh fruits and vegetables left when they got there. The kids were able to sell them 20-30% cheaper than the market, but the difference is they were 1 day old, and the markets are all, the fresh stuff you buy is cold storage. It's 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks old. So here you're selling a superior product at less money cost and providing an excellent revenue for 3 young entrepreneurs. I said, I'm not going to get up at 2 a.m. all the time, but I'll bet you can find a building custodian who knows when the last tenant goes to sleep, who'll be happy to run you up, and do if you can do the turnaround in a couple hours there, which happened. One of these boys who originally started this is a manager of a restaurant now down in the South Street Seaport. And one of them, this is amazing. One of them is one of these billionaire vitamin hustlers who runs these hard sell ads on the radio. And, there's some earnest interview with someone who says, right, I got rid of everything, my ugliness, my cancer. It all happened. Really, my kids. Okay. Let me see if there are any here that are. I want to show you some of the range of things that are possible that seem to me very possible in the Boston area. This was an absolute winner. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Manhattan's broken into, 30 or 32 zip code zones. And to most of us, that's just a slight extra burden when you're addressing envelopes. But in fact, a huge part of the marketing business depends on knowing the human characteristics of the people in the zip code zone, and you can buy certain zip code zones, and you'll pay through the nose for ones in which people, for example, have made a purchase by mail in the last 30 days from a zip code zone. You pay a lot, but what you're getting is prime suckers who've already revealed, what their weakness is. I thought about that for a long time. I was looking for ways to break the urban fear of moving by your own legs and feet. That you gotta wait for a bus or a subway in New York City. And I was looking for some way to provide a rationale for actually what I wanted the kids to do was to walk all over Manhattan. It's 12 miles long. It's about 2 miles wide. It's not a very difficult thing to master Manhattan. When I came from Pittsburgh to Columbia University, I used to set aside a street like Broadway, and I would walk from, like 180th Street on Broadway all the way down to the Staten Island Ferry on Saturday, and then I would shift over to something like 6th Avenue and pick it up at 59th Street and walk the length of it. I wanted to know every street of my city. When I'd go to the baseball game at Yankee Stadium, it was 9 miles away. That's not a very long walk. And by walking there, you pass through these changing neighborhoods. So I realized in a very, very short time that I knew considerably more about New York City than the people I knew who had grown up there in their life in it, because they would only travel on tracks or in vehicles, and the city is much constrained when you do that. Well, so this project was to pass through the different zip code zones, and it took quite a long time, with the knowledge of what the median income in the zip code zone was, and trying to see how a difference in $1,000 or $2,000 a year median income turns out in shop windows, in the way people dress, in the housing, in the cleanliness of the streets. It's quite incredible the tiny differences show up. And if any of you know the famous American sociologist Jenks, Christopher Jenks, wrote a blockbuster book about schools in 1964 called Inequality, in which he maintained that the difference of $1,000 a year in income makes a radical difference in the culture of the family. And when I was disposed to throw that out right away, suddenly it dawned on me that just $1,000 a year would mean that the young lady could have 3 party dresses a year, and maybe the guy, the kid, the boy could go to a baseball game 4 or 5 times, that the family might be able to eat out once a month instead of never eating out, except at McDonald's they might be able to have a subscription to the local newspaper. It is a vast difference at a time. Jenks correlated it with scores on the SAT exams, and he said it is an absolute positive correlation. That you add $1,000 in income, he says you can count on, I forget what the chunk of points is, you can count on this. You can just bank that information. So I wanted the kids to experience that in person without preaching, but also I wanted them to be aware of one of the many vast ways to make a living that are utterly invisible to people who really aren't coached. If you know that the marketing industry exists in your early teens, or even before that, you know how you're manipulated. You know why that suddenly in September all the clothing is purple, or the left sleeve is 4 inches longer than the right sleeve. You can see the people making these decisions, hiring the Beatles or whoever their flacks are to peddle this as if it were some natural expression of First Amendment rights, and to milk it for as much boodle as you can get, and then you do it again, and you can do it endlessly as long as people are unaware that they can be manipulated that way. The minute they're aware, it's much, much harder to manipulate them. Well, I have lots of other things here, but I'm going to stop right after I show you Victor. Right after I show you Victor. Victor, hello. That's Victor. Did they give you Victor's resume? It would knock your socks off. This is a 15-year-old kid who never, 14-year-old kid, who never ate off a tablecloth in his life, who was listed in the school records as a criminal, I mean, just open and shut, had a list of police charges against him a mile long. This is a boy who was hired as a television producer at the age of 15 when he presented his resume of what he had done. Master of Ceremonies at Carnegie Hall. He had been an advisor to Senator Kerry in his presidential run for the Democratic nomination, the one that Clinton got. He was a personal friend of Deborah Winger. I mean, it just went on and on and on, because Victor never came to school. And there you see Victor in white tie and tails. He arrived at Carnegie Hall. As usual, he didn't know his part. And I grabbed Victor, and I said, Victor, your mother's going to be out there, and she is going to be humiliated. I don't have time to holistically show you something about standing on the stage in the most awesome theater probably in the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The seats climb up at a very, very steep pitch. So the whole room is there when you're there. I said, Victor, I'm going to give you a course in rhetoric in 10 minutes, and if you do it exactly what I tell you to do it, the audience will think that you were born with a microphone in your hand. I said, but if you do anything like what you just showed me, I said, you'll disgrace your mother. I said, the audience will mill restlessly, and they'll slowly edge to a seat closer to the door. Learned it instantly. I said, Victor, only say 2 or 3 words and then throw hesitation in your voice. I said, there are ways to do that. I said, but forget, we don't have time. Just every 2 or 3 words, a little hesitation in your voice, like that. And sometimes when you complete a sentence, Victor, I said, let 2 or 3 beats go by before you start the next one. Just stuff like that, which I learned in 3rd grade in a Jesuit seminary in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where I was beaten almost every day because I wouldn't eat the beets that they grew at the seminary. I wouldn't eat beets anyway, and even if you beat me. Would you take a look at the newspaper model that you have? None of it is dummied up. None of it is the result of foundation grants or collegiate expertise. All of those things are real. Almost all of them were generated by the kids. The 3 girls who were the best writers in the class rewrote all the stories so that it would have the same tone in each of them, because we had a secondary purpose. I said, if you can get yourself in 3 newspaper articles, it's not an accident this paper is laid out a lot like the New York Times. Because if you cut these things out and paste them up, nobody knows these came from a school newspaper. So if you have 3 of these, I said, that's a college scholarship, it's a summer job. I said, it's big advantages. And private school kids, more or less, are taught these things, that you document who you are. I taught the kids how to build a resume backwards. You start with the only point of a resume. I know that it causes great grief in many lives, and it caused it in mine. But a guy in the Princeton admissions office told me 20 years ago, he said, the only point of a resume is to show that you can handle responsibility. And the more different kinds of responsibility, and it's a throwaway when people put it down as if it didn't matter. Let me tell you something, that a balanced human being will have a physical hobby, they'll have a social hobby, and they'll have an intellectual hobby. Not basketball, football, swimming, but basketball, chess, long-distance hiking. That you show with your hobbies what you do when your time's your own. All the rest of the stuff is when you're under the direction of some adult or official. But what you select on your own, he said, is utterly decisive. And if you show through that line that you don't know how to use your own time, he said, I can tell you this, we don't want you at Princeton. And why should you want a person like that in? I mean, I'm being a little bit strong and heavy-handed here. When it's so easy to develop these different aspects, which I think are universal to all of us. Okay, if you take 5 minutes free from my voice and a breath for yourself and leaf through this newspaper, you will see a variety of undertakings that the class was doing in I would guess, a 6-week period. And many of them aren't in here. We only print all the news that fits. We print. And then maybe afterwards, you guys can talk and ask me what it is that you're particularly interested in. Meanwhile, I'll just look at the crowd. Huh? Oh, there must be. There's a copy for everybody who's here, but they're not with me. There was one of the people in the back of the room. You can have my copy here. But then what will I... I have 2 copies. I have 2. Oh, that's not right. See the boy and the girl on the lower right hand, page 3? That's 5 a.m. in the morning at the Port Authority bus terminal, which next to the wholesale food market in New York City has to be the second most dangerous place in the United States. They're leaving on a bus. I'm not putting them on the bus. Their mother's not putting them on the bus, but my wife is putting them on the bus. They're leaving on a bus for Albany, New York, where 3 hours later they'll step off the bus and they will notify their state representative that they're in town to see what he does for his constituents. He does not know they're coming. That's him in the first column on page 3. And they said to me, well, what if he won't talk to us or won't see us? And I said, well, then you'll get on the bus and you'll come back to New York City. Yeah. About 2 years ago, someone said to me, oh, do you know what happened to Jason Weinberg? He's the fellow who's grinning. Judy Trescott, I ran into her mother on a Broadway bus, and she said, you know, Judy, who couldn't speak. Did you ever run into girls like that? Guys, too, who are absolutely mute. They cannot speak, period. They can speak one-to-one, but in a classroom setting, they can't talk. She said, Judy just got out of law school. She said, going to Albany changed her life. Not all at once, but bit by bit, she just threw that personality away. They were invited to go over and address the New York State Senate. They were taken out to dinner. And you know what would have happened if you'd have asked permission to go in advance. Permission? Denied. That's right. Okay.
Oh man, I got it there. Yes. Here's what happened to Jason Weinberg. That's some local New York, throwaway rag, but publicity whiz Jason Weinberg, flanked by one of his clients, Israeli supermodel, Mishaela, whatever. Jason, not a bad way to earn your living, Jason. And Judy's a lawyer, so when Jason gets in trouble, as you and I know he will, do you see anything in those papers that you'd like to ask about or comment about? There's really some revolutionary stuff there. At a time when the local Democratic clubs of the Upper West Side of Manhattan had announced that after a month-long voter registration drive, they could only get 500 votes because there was tremendous voter apathy. And my kids said, well, why is there voter apathy? I said, there isn't. I said, if you owned all the jobs, would you want new people to register in your party who might change the direction the party was going in? And they said, that can't be true. And I said, well, I'm going to declare a 2-day school holiday. Why don't you go out and register people yourself on the west side of Manhattan? And as you'll see on the first page of the newspaper, in 2 days, my kids registered 1,000 voters. But in the sign-ups on the street run by the local political clubs for a month, only 500 voters signed up. One of the kids said, a woman opened a window high up in a building and screamed, are those voter registration forms? In New York City, they're huge and they're like orangish, so there's nothing else looks like them. She said, I'm coming right down. And he said, one of that kid said the guy was talking on a payphone on the street. He threw the phone down and ran over to give me one of those. You might wonder why they're so desperate to get one. To get one right away, you have to travel to a single location in Manhattan that's extremely remote. It's, I think, on 10th Avenue and 26th Street. And then it's on the 10th floor of a building, and no employee in the building, as far as I could see, is under 75 or 80. So they're not really anxious to, it's the final payoff for a life badly lived, I guess. Is there anything there that, or even if it isn't in the paper? Yes, sir. A lot of different ways is the answer. When you're determined to do it, whatever works, works. For example, if a particular kid is a tremendous pain, you never go through the authorities. Never, never, never. In no instance. You go to the other teachers and you say, would you mind if Jason Weinberg isn't in the class for a few days? Nobody ever says, oh, I'd mind terribly. Now, occasionally, and there are a lot of different ways, I'll show you some. Occasionally, if you say, would you mind if the class didn't show up for the next couple of days, you very, very seldom, you say they're doing a project at Columbia University with the retired professors, which, by the way, is a live possibility for you. They're desperate for something to do. Often they're the best people in the department or the heads of the departments, and there can't be a college that doesn't have a retired professors chapter. My kids had keys to the the astronomy thing, you know, where you look at Carl Sagan's ridiculous ideas, there are millions and millions of worlds where people live or something lives. Another way to do it is to actually, if you think of the politics of schooling, nobody at all who's visible has any positive power to change the system. That includes the principal, the superintendent. They have negative power to put drag on things that would change the system. The positive power, it's almost all rhetoric. But notice that just as the government in ancient Sparta had no power at all, I mean, they put on these shows for the boobs, and if you knew who the ephors were, or if you read Hobbes' Leviathan, you could figure out where the ephors were. I tried to figure out who, in fact, was calling the shots in the schools, if they wanted to. And I was able to establish layers and layers. Gee, I had a pack of file cards with
display card, and somewhere between encountering you and sending 2 letters to my granddaughter from the death, that's probably where they are. And once you set them down, you'll recognize them if it's thrown out of garbage at the end of my life. Because I'll never be patient enough to do it. You know, one of them would be the politics of schooling to be a list of about 14 power bases, but I can remember enough of them. The local business community is much, much more important than your superintendent. Now you got to know, it's not the local business community. What does that vast generalization mean? There will be businesses that are constantly active in the school because they sell the straws or a variety of other products. They keep an eye on the schools. Those people are extremely vulnerable to an interesting project to do. And once they say, yeah, I would like to do that, or would like to take in your kids as an apprentice one day a week, I guarantee you there's not a principal or superintendent in the United States would dare to even think about saying no. If you have a local university with political clout, and of course Columbia was just a few blocks from me, there is not the instance where something requested on a Columbia letterhead would in fact be denied by a local school district. And I'm sure Boston's full of colleges that have similar clout to that. A constant resource that I had reference to was parents. It's very difficult to reach parents, but I would start each school year and actually visit as many homes as I could, because that was done to me when I was in school in Pittsburgh. I would call, I would give information sessions, and I would hold a little party one day a week, a coffee and donuts party. I never got more than a third of the parents, but often I got that many of them would show up, and now I had a personal relationship. I would say that a group of 5, 6, 7 parents could bring any school in the country to its knees if they so chose, and the principal is well aware of that. So he will not choose, as long as he's not told too much about what you're doing. He doesn't want to know anyway. But it will not choose to deny those requests. Every once in a while, I would get a class for a year. Not often. I mean, I did this for about 21 years out of the 30 I taught. Maybe twice that happened, but then there were no restraints caused by other teachers there. So if you want to do it, you can do it. If you're the homeroom teacher,
obviously nobody else really has the power to punish your kids, because even if they do, you're the one who enters the punishment on the records. You know, hey, hey, well, we won't go into that. Are there some other questions or comments on what you see there? This is meant to be an illustration that young kids are capable of anything, and furthermore, just because they're capable of it's not a reason to do it. The payoff is very, very quick. Doesn't happen right away. But 90 days after your kid has shouldered real responsibility, you're not talking to a kid any longer, really. You're talking to a human being of one or the other gender, who looks you in the eye and doesn't want their time wasted. The learning about a mature way to live is breathtakingly fast if it's allowed to occur. Here, let me show you one other picture here. What you're about to see, if I can find it, is a 7-year-old boy, an 8-year-old boy, he says, desperately leafing through these, and a 13-year-old boy on the Staten Island Ferry at the moment before they set out to ride across the United States on their bicycles. Now, they got to deal with their parents that once every 100 miles, they will check in. Let's see if I can. No, well, it was there, but you're not going to get to see it. And that happens all the time. I mean, outside of our awareness, and maybe many of the people are in the room right in front of me, outside of our awareness, there are thousands of people who grow up in the United States a different way. And there's abundant evidence, if you go to the primary sources of American history, that a great many of the people who later had power in the society grew up a different way. Yes? It's reciprocity. It happens both ways. I see something in the paper, the kid sees something in the paper, or the kid has some compelling need to move in a certain direction that's been muted in all the venues that the kid travels in. But if you listen, they'll all tell you. When people used to argue that there was a need to do testing, I would say that there cannot be a public school teacher with any brains in their head at all who at the end of the first day, from simply intensely watching the kids in front of them, doesn't know where they're going to score, even doesn't know a whole lot about their home life. So you listen to the kids. I would set myself the goal not of doing things for classes. Remember, I'm trying to declassify children, but for doing things for individual kids. If I see a kid who's mute and will not speak, I know that they are so badly damaged in the, in the journey ahead of them that nothing else should matter at all except giving them some audiences that they can speak before and develop the ability to swim like some noble fish through the human environments they're going to face. That does not heal itself as you get older. It gets worse. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but not many of them. And certainly by 13, there can't be many classes where other than 5 or 6 kids don't dominate the
the oral environment, I would get kids like that aside. Got one who's a lawyer now too, Larry Engelstein. I took him aside. I said, Larry, if you ever raise your hand in this class again or say anything, I said, I'm just going to destroy your grade, which for Larry meant getting a 96 instead of 99 or something. I said, you already have mastered that trick. And for you to endlessly practice on people who are already your subjects is a waste of your time, and you're preempting time that belongs to people who need a safe environment to speak in. I saw Larry Engelstein 3 or 4 years ago, and he said, that one encounter, and I said, I'll trade you. Go out and find tough audiences, Larry. And they're not hard to find, and then hone your skills. He said it changed his life. Being able to see himself with his little trick, doing the trick over. We're all that way, what works for us. At the end of a school year, I would often take whatever I had done that worked, just throw it away. I didn't want to think about it again. I wanted to always start from scratch and see people not as representatives of types, but as what they are, like their fingerprint, utterly unique. They each require a private and personal curriculum. There are certainly group things that are valuable to everybody. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. That's brilliant. What this lady said is these are spectacular stories. But when you're compelled to be a performer in front of a workshop, people don't want to hear about little triumphs like May Moy, who had a brilliant understanding and sensitivity to the Chinese language, and just sounded like some ignorant washerwoman in English. And I knew that May was capable, if not overnight, almost that quickly, of simply moving this feeling she had from one to the other. And I'd do that. I'd talk to May after school, not about that. I mean, we would talk about ideas. And one day, May, and I don't know if this is a universal Chinese characteristic, but certainly in some of the Chinese immigrants in New York City, there's a kind of a really aggressive disdain. And May threw a poem down on my desk and went to her seat, and I looked at it, and I mean, tears would come to your eyes. This 13-year-old girl who wasn't even her own culture, and it was magnificently subtle and powerful. I knew immediately that I better not open my mouth about language in front of this girl because she would put me in my place. With a mute kid, for that person to see that they have a right to be heard is a huge victory. Just with that, with somebody who is always whining, to realize that it doesn't hurt very much to get punched. Even if someone beats you blood, it doesn't hurt very, it really doesn't. What hurts is to constantly slink around. So, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, and in fact I picked that out as an incident. Because the school environment in most places is brutal, regardless of what you see as parents. So that's a good school, they're okay. I mean, it really is like under the surface of a mill pond. I mean, these kids are always hitting each other in the kidney or saying something devastating that just ruins you. I mean, I would have to speak from a male point of view. This whole idea that in holistic whole word exercises, that you just take risks with language, not in front of that 7-year-old girl over there who you would just paralyze, your tongue swells up in your mouth. You're not going to take any risks. You're going to play it safe. And certainly not in front of the boy who lives to humiliate you when you get out in the play. You're not going to take these risks
I know I'm a little bit off the subject here, but it's one of the great anomalies is that this great reading war that's taking place is just miscast inside a safe home environment where there's some love and you can take risks. You know, it works like a charm. I mean, it's hard to stop somebody from learning how to read. But you put people in a formal, staged setting and pretend that it's the same. It's like pretending that a school teacher is a mother or father. You know, it's bunk. So there, he said. Yes, ma'am. Could you speak a little louder? And that's one of the tricks I would always use. I say you can say anything you want in the class, but you've got to say it loud enough for everybody to hear. Yes. Oh, no, I don't want to. I mean, the answer is yes, but this whole self-esteem stuff is. You don't deserve self-esteem until you have some sense of who you are and what your power is. And everybody has power, and everybody's somebody. But if you lay on, one of the most damaging things is to lay on praise that isn't earned. Obviously, if it's your own kid, you know, there is love and respect here that's mutual. But let the kids out. Kids will constantly bring you drawings, and I know what happens in homeschools as well as public schools, drawings that they've copied from comic books. You know, and they're not bad as imitations there, but at some point you have to point out that imitating someone else's art is not where it's at. It may be a stage on the way. I don't mean to put the kid down. When they do that, I say, look, what you've done. That looks pretty much like Spider-Man and so on, but look, you've got the Spider-Man model in front of you, and you don't see that all the panels aren't the same size, that when they want to indicate speed, there might be 3 long, narrow, vertical panels in a row. You know, and when they want to stop the action of the reader's mind, they use the whole page, or sometimes the guy's hand or his foot will go out of the barrier. I said, none of that's in there, and you were looking at it when you copied. But you were so frightened about violating the frame, you know, so go back and look at it harder and make it a better copy, and then start thinking of your own ideas. There wasn't a year when my kids didn't besiege Marvel Comics in D.C. I think D.C.'s out of business, but I don't know that. And the editor of Marvel Comics lived in my building, and I was not loath to rat on that fact, but I taught kids discreet approaches. You know, I see, remember millions of kids, you know, sell the family home and migrate to New York so they can go to Marvel Comics. The last thing you want to see if you're in the comic business is a kid. You know, what can they possibly do except damage? I said, but you got to find a way to offer a quid pro quo. You must not ever ask for something unless you're really in duress, unless you have something to give in return. And kids will often say, but I don't have anything to give in return. And that's foolish. Simply close attention, and their feedback is priceless stuff that market research firms charge through the nose for. There's a natural payoff in a kid who's intelligent and interested and passionate and respectful of what they're asking for. Is a natural payoff. The most unexpected thing about placing, there wouldn't be a year when every one of my kids wouldn't have either a long apprenticeship or a number of short apprenticeships. I thought that these would be extremely difficult to get. And by the third or fourth year, there were way more people calling and saying, can you send more of these kids, than I had kids to distribute. It wasn't because I had awakened the milk of human kindness in their breast. It's because your kids have a currency to trade for what they're given. Just their attention and their intelligent questions. Haven't you had, as parents, the experience that I had regularly as a teacher, that the kid will see an aspect of something you know that you have not seen, and it'll deepen or broaden your own understanding? Look at what we've done to our so-called adult communities by bleeding all the children out of them during the workday and bleeding all the old people out of them. You only need to read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography to understand the vitality that crackled through colonial America when everybody virtually was a person mixing together. I don't know if that's an answer to the question. Yes, ma'am. Wait, repeat that again, what you just said. Repeat. Yeah, right. Okay, I am too. There's a whole variety of answers to that, but I'll give you a few definite ones. I heard you say you wanted your kid to take college courses. Did I hear that correctly? So let me... Is there anybody here who's not heard of Dr. John Bear? This would be worth the price of the whole conference, just by itself. And call him. I'll give you the town he lives in. Benicia, I think it's California. It's on the San Francisco Bay. Benicia. Bear has, for the last 30 years, been putting out a thick telephone book catalog called Guide to Alternative Ways to Go to College. I've made that up. You can buy it here. Oh, but if it's the 10-speed press one, I would not buy. Flatly. Bear sold his idea to 10-speed press about 7 years ago, and 10-speed press has cut it way down to like 100 schools. For the same money, you can buy it directly from John Bear in Benicia. He retained the rights to sell the whole thing. Call him up and say, I want to buy one of them. You give me a Visa thing, you'll get it. And I will tell you this. My daughter, who graduated from MIT and was making a lot of money for IBM, and said, this is tremendously dull, but it'll get better, right? I said, no, you'll make a lot more money, it'll get duller. And she said she wanted to try school teaching for a couple of years, and I said, you've got about 20 to 36 of these insane pedagogical credits to take. I said, however, you can take them by mail, by correspondence from hundreds of schools in the United States. And so instead of paying Bank Street College $350 a credit and going for 2 years, which she wouldn't have done, she paid Penn State $75 a credit and got all, whatever it was, 30 or whatever it was, in 6 months, and told me that she had learned more from doing it that way than she'd learned from any course she ever took at MIT. So she got her teaching license instantly, much, much cheaper. And furthermore, I didn't have a 10-year-old kid who go. I had a 13-year-old boy who started while he was in junior high school. And when his friends were, and by the way, he was a C student, when his friends were freshmen or sophomores in high school, he already had his degree from Fordham, which, you know, if you're into Jesuit schools, it's in a bad place. There, you can, no matter what the specialty that requires college credits is, or degrees, you can take those degrees or those credits by correspondence from the greatest schools in the United States, and about 40% to a third of the cost of going to the college. Furthermore, the degree or the credits aren't stamped by mail. They're exactly the same degree that Harvard gives if you go to Harvard. Now, that suggests something to you. Or Stanford or Cal or the New York State system, which is excellent. Yes, ma'am. He took 2 years of college credits beginning in junior high school. So I guess he got the second year when he was at the end of his freshman year in high school. And then the college, after seeing that he had 2 years of work, took him in as a student. And they said that he would get his high school diploma at the same time he got his college degree. And I remember, now it just came to me, my daughter was furious. When she got to MIT, she said, this place is hoaching with kids who went to high school from the back of those match packages. You know, get your high school diploma by mail, and they're 12, 13, 14 years old, she said, and MIT didn't have any trouble taking them in. But get Bear's book, get the real Bear's book from Bear himself. It's only legal for him to sell the real one by mail order. I don't know his address, but I do know that his name's in the phone book, and it's Venecia, and you can call him up, and you'll have it. Give him an extra $3 to send it priority mail, and you'll have it. And then sky's the limit. You want a couple of PhDs? You want a law degree? B-E-A-R, Dr. John Bear. Say that one more time. Oh, how about a PhD from the London School of Economics where Mick Jagger went? Sure, absolutely. It's Bear's Guide to alternative. No, that's it. Someone says it back there. To non-traditional, but they're not. They're the same degree from the same school. I mean, it's a non-traditional way to get them. That's all. You do it yourself. Yeah. Let me repeat what this young fellow's saying here. He took the Shelter Institute course in Bath, Maine, which all by itself is a trip. Bath is so nice, isn't it? And it's 3 weeks. Oh, okay, so they do it a lot of different ways, but then they have one straight 3-week thing. They'll teach you to build a post and beam house, and if you stay an extra week or two, you know, they'll add plumbing or foundations or whatever to it. It's one family, and as the kids grew up, they've joined the business. I was the keynote speaker for their 25th anniversary 3 years ago, and I'll tell you, in a room this size, the walls were covered with houses built by bus drivers or psychiatrists. The people were transported by the act of building their own house. So the question here partly was, why doesn't this idea catch on? Well, if you drive out on Cape Cod to Wellfleet or to Provincetown, I mean, you'll see hundreds of homes built in the 18th century and the early 19th century that are just breathtaking. They weren't built by architects. And they were built by people who decided, well, I got some time on my hands, I'll build a house. If you come to where I am over in New York State between Ithaca and Cooperstown, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is, the new stuff, but, you know, it's $250,000, is all pre-cut lumber, and the truth is you can't look at it for very long. It's not that it's ugly, it's just not. But these frame places with the turned spindles and the eccentricity are everywhere, and they were built by the people who lived in them. There, could we restore, pardon? The Shelter Institute in Bath, Maine, and if you have your house in hand, you can walk down the street and there's the Maine Boat Building Institute, and they'll teach you how to build a Boston whaler, a dory, and a skiff. You build 3 boats in 8 months. That's how you learn to do it. That's not bad, because you walk out of Bath, Maine, towing your house over one shoulder, and you're 3 boats over the other, and your total your tuition was about $700, $800, like that. And at the Boat Building Institute, it's I think $800 or $1,000. Come on, everybody could have these things. The United States is as close to empty. When I was a boy, you couldn't drive anywhere as there weren't people. You go through the Catskill Mountains, and there was one homestead next to it. There weren't any forests. Everybody's gathered into 50 urban areas now. The country's emptier than it's ever been. I have 113 acres over in a beautiful area of New York State, and anyone here who had a paper route could have bought it. It was $500 down and $90 a month for 7 years at 6% interest. Why was it so cheap? Because nobody wanted to live there. That's why they wanted to go to the big city and, I don't know, go on welfare. I don't know why they want to go to the big cities. But right now, as we talk, here's a project your kids could do. Pick the state, Massachusetts, New York, and send a postcard to every county clerk in every county in the state. So in New York, there's like 75 counties, so 75 postcards, and ask for the tax sale lists when they're posted in the summer. An enormous number of people, and this is hard to believe in the United States, simply get tired of owning something, cancel, and they just walk away from it. That's one way it gets in tax sales. Another way it gets in tax sales, people die without heirs, and they're too mean to leave it to anyone else, so they go into tax sales. You can buy, virtually at all times, spectacular land. It may not have a hard road, but God knows in this part of the world it's stone about a quarter-inch down anyway. And it may not have developed water, but that's not very difficult to get. I own my land as part of a class session I had where I was trying to show a mixed class which included some poor kids that in a country like this, when people get bored, they give away great value. And I said, for example, if you find areas of the country where land isn't fashionable, land will be given away, or as close to it as possible. So I took a Sunday New York Times, ad lib, and I just opened it. I said, let's read down this list. And then about the fourth one I read was Tumbling Waterfall Retreat. 99 acres, more or less, $500 down. And I said, if this was a strip mine would be worth that. And so the kids said, well, if it's so good, why don't you buy it? I said, tell you what, I'm going to get onto the payphone right now and tell the guy that I'm going to buy it. And I called up and I said, I'm going to wire the money up. And they asked me when I was going to come up to look at it. I said, no. The third and fourth sons who couldn't, they didn't get anything. And of course, they did horrible things to the Indians. But certainly, it's the most potent nation on earth, not because of the CIA, but because common people were allowed to do very, very uncommon things. The boot was off their neck, and they understood that they could feed themselves and clothe themselves and teach themselves to read. This was far and away the most literate nation the world had ever seen. And when Alexis de Tocqueville came here in 1835, he didn't like a lot of what he saw, but he said there never again can be a theory that says people distribute themselves over a bell curve, because the country has contradicted it by the behavior of these common people. And even today, there's no competition against the United States in the world. Japan doesn't invent anything. They do develop. Germany doesn't invent much. And this is the source of 82% of the patents on the planet are patented here. It's as if that energy that was loose in the land is still staggering along, even when many people want to rein it in. Well, hey, enough speeches there. But are there practical? We got John Bear. I would teach my kids, but I've got to step away from this. I would teach my kids that the only way anyone knew they were 13 years old was the way they stood. They smiled too much. They carried big floppy notebooks and all fell out of the ground. I said, watch what these naughty Columbia kids do when they come down here. They've got a clipboard, and they cock it at a jaunty angle on their head. We would go through drills like that. One of the drills we used was at the ritziest, certainly tied for the ritziest auction gallery in New York City, Christie Mansion Woods, which frequently has auctions of really neat stuff like old toys or old comic books, but the kids couldn't get in. And they said they were prejudiced. And I said, that's a working hypothesis. I don't think it's true, but we can test it. Instead of, I could describe in front of the class what happens when you try to get in. Well, I walk up there and the guard, and so I put his hand on my shoulder and says, where are you going? And I said, I'm going up to see the comic book. And he said, no kids allowed. And then I picked Danny Snow. Danny, go over there and see what happens to you. Because Danny's a white kid. Danny's over and in fact, he says, the guy put his hand on my shoulder and says, where are you going? He says, no kids allowed. Now we're going to run into it. I'm running a blue blazer with shiny brass buttons. What's this blue blazer? Now we'll practice. Walk with a purposeful manner. Not as though you're going to be soft. The hand is on your shoulder, I can freeze. Don't turn around. Freeze. And then snap around and say, I beg your pardon. They didn't come back for the of the day. That team. I'm supposed to ask where young people are going. My mother's upstairs. I'm meeting her. Is there some objection? And I would drill them so they could say it loud. Stupid kids grin on their face. Never a problem at all. To get into the sub-treasury of New York, I don't know if it's deliberately, that's where all the money's burned off and the stacks of gold to the ceiling. To get in there, you need one teacher for every 5 students. Well, forget it, unless you're a ritzy private school, and somebody knows that. But I looked my class over, and I could easily pick out 6 kids who, if they carried themselves a different way, you couldn't tell. And I said, now, what we did drills there for was to you get them to line up in size places. Ralph, you're out of line. Check it out. I mean, we do all these fussy little things teachers did. We were never stopped. We were never, Bronx Zoo is 1 for 15, and I was always going around 60 kids. Never stopped anywhere. And finally I came to see that we teach kids signs so they can be identified and put back in their place. But to get rid of those signs isn't a matter of intense study. It's really a matter of saying, I mean, let's show these pictures. That's what it's a matter. It's a matter of 10 minutes or half an hour. It's a matter of strategy. And you're people again and not children. You have access to anything. I had 2 shy girls ride with a long-distance truck driver down to North Carolina. I dropped them off in the swamps of Secaucus, New Jersey at 4 a.m. in the morning. It was a dense fog. I was scared. I have a picture of them. I think it's in the newspaper. Just check. My newspaper is I think it might be Harry Payton. Hey, I dropped them off in there. Where? Page 8? Well, yeah, there they are. First call at the bottom. There they are. A police car came by. They went over and stood next to it to get to be safe. And they say, well, what if this truck driver doesn't show up? I said, well, you're only right across the river from New York. You find a bus, you get on the bus, you'll be in the Port Authority. Then you really have a reason to be scared. But some of you know the Port Authority bus terminal. It's a creepy. Is it better now? I haven't been there for years. Okay. It was something I saw here. These 2 on page 6 are worth looking at. This girl, Julie Coates here, was an absolutely despicable human being. She really was unpleasant to be around. She whined all the time, but she came from a rather favored background. She constantly was worried that someone else got more than her. And she came to me and said that she wanted to apprentice with Sue Simmons, who was the new, as they called them in those days, news hand in New York City, getting $500,000 a year and about 30 pounds lighter than she is now. She really was dynamite on Channel 4 in New York City. And she said, I said, boy, that's a tough one, because if they let anybody in there at all, it's going to be private school kids. They said, but the best way to do it is not to approach the network, because they will absolutely say no. Is to find out where Sue Simmons lives, and then to begin leaving little gifts for her, boxes of brownies, flowers, and be relentless. Never not have something there every week, you know, and then we'll soften her up and leave little pathetic notes saying that you want to do a slide sound show of the operation of the NBC newsroom, and you want to put it out on the circuit so that every school in Community School District 3, that's the Upper West Side, will have a copy to refer to, the life of a news handler. They're like this. And one day, just like the Yoko Ono story, I got a call in a voice that was as hard as diamonds said to me, "Is this Mr. Gatto?" "Yes." She said, "This is Sue Simmons. You send the little bitch over, and I never want to hear from either one of you again." Mind you, I told you, I said, this is a rotten, wretched thing to do to fellow human beings. You know, it's as bad as building a Beatles memorial in Central Park. Instead of grass, you get to walk on the bronze letters of Beatle lyrics. Look. Oh, did it change Julie? The big catch in my class was Danny Sullivan, who's in this newspaper. He was apprenticed to Lieutenant Governor Cuomo. Dan's a big, shaggy Irish kid. And of course, he wouldn't give the time of day to somebody like Julie Post. About 3 years later, I ran into him on the street. Julie had utterly changed, not whining at all. She had caught Danny Sullivan, who was in college somewhere, I can't remember the college there. I could tell they were definitely an item, you know, for the long haul there, and I didn't have to ask. Understanding that you have power, that you're acceptable, is magic for kids. You don't really have to do much after that. They do it for themselves. Look at Robert Hooper. Same page. Robert Hooper was easily the most talented actor I ever saw. He ran the talent show that traveled around, and he applied to Performing Arts High School and was turned down on the basis of a 4-minute interview, and really turned down because he had excessive absences in the junior high. What kind of nonsense was it? I mean, Robert was multi-talented in everything. He was in tears when he came to me, and he was a pretty tough kid. I said, you don't have to accept the school position. Their vulnerability lies in the fact that they dictate your future on the basis of 240 seconds and thousands of kids are lined up. From their point of view, procedurally, that's all they can manage, but they don't have a leg to stand on if you challenge their decision on the basis of that. I said, but don't write a letter to them because they'll throw it in the wastebasket. I said, go out and get a petition with thousands of names on it, not challenging that you didn't get in, challenging that the decision is made on the basis of a, 4-minute or a 2-minute interview. Oh, thank you. And the first person, or one of the first persons to sign his petition was Tim Curry, who was on the dais in the Broadway show. Well, it's in the West Side. I think Andy from here is on the West Side. And the West Side that's the bedroom for publishing and television, the theater, and everything. For me. So anyway, he got this petition. And when the challenge, which is totally effective, literally, and is designed to catch the attention of the media, right? When the challenge was posed, not as a challenge, but as a possibility,